Imagine you are a retired teacher living in Cologne, Germany. It is the beginning of 2026, a cold winter night. You are standing in the kitchen, holding the electricity bill you just received. This month you have to pay 348 euros, which is 18% higher than the same time last year. You remember 30 years ago when you first started working, Germany was hailed as the economic engine of Europe, and electricity was cheap and stable. But now, your neighbors are discussing whether to turn off the heating to save money. Just 3 days ago, the newly appointed Chancellor Merz admitted at a business conference that phasing out nuclear energy was a serious strategic mistake. The audience fell silent. This admission comes a bit late. Germany has already paid a price of 500 billion euros for this decision, and the bill is still increasing. Today, we are going to dive into the truth behind this cost. This is not a simple story of success or failure, but a complex case about the conflict between ideals and reality. When the world's most powerful industrial nation decided to abandon nuclear energy, coal, and Russian natural gas simultaneously, what exactly happened? Why did German factories start closing, while wind and solar energy achieved huge success? Fasten your seatbelts. We are about to explore the most expensive energy experiment in modern economic history. To understand today's predicament, we must go back to that decisive moment, March 11th, 2011. That afternoon, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck off the northeast coast of Japan, triggering a massive tsunami that destroyed the cooling systems of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. This disaster happened 8,000 kilometers away from Germany, in a seismically active zone, affecting a reactor design that was 40 years old. Logically speaking, Germany should have conducted a safety assessment, perhaps checked its own backup systems, and then continued operations. But politics never plays by the rules. 3 days later, on March 14th, Germany saw the largest anti-nuclear protests since Chernobyl. Over 250,000 people took to the streets. The Green Party's approval rating surged by 7 percentage points in a single week. Even more critical was that Germany was about to hold a key election in the state of Baden-Württemberg, a traditional stronghold for Merkel's Christian Democratic Union. Facing surging public opinion, this doctor of quantum chemistry made a decision that defied science but aligned with political logic. Shut down 8 nuclear reactors immediately and promised to close all nuclear power plants by 2022. This is like smashing your stove in the middle of a blizzard and then saying the sun will eventually come out. Germany instantly lost about 10 gigawatts of clean electricity. These reactors had no technical problems, no safety hazards, and had even just passed safety inspections. The only reason they were shut down was political panic. Even more ironic is that Germany did not replace this nuclear power with renewable energy, but instead restarted coal plants that were supposed to be retired. The result is, to avoid the risks of a nuclear accident, Germany chose air pollution that kills thousands of people every year. Now let us clarify a fact that is often misunderstood. Germany has achieved amazing success in renewable energy. By 2025, renewable energy accounted for 58% of Germany's electricity mix. The costs of wind and solar energy dropped by over 80%, creating more than 300,000 jobs. Germany became a major global exporter of clean technology. But every coin has 2 sides, and Germany found itself trapped on the edge of the coin. Germany's North Sea has abundant wind resources, but the industrial zones in the southern states of Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg need a stable power supply. To transport wind power from the north to the south requires building the Südlink transmission line. a massive 800-kilometer engineering project originally scheduled for completion in 2022, which has now been delayed to 2028. This delay created an absurd situation. In 2022, Germany paid a record 4.2 billion euros to wind farms in the north to stop generating electricity because the grid could not handle the excess power. At the same time, factories in the south had to start gas and coal-fired units to maintain operations. Germans paid for clean electricity they didn't get, and then paid again for the dirty electricity they were forced to use. This is what Germans call phantom electricity. You can imagine it like this. It's like paying for a Tesla you can't buy, and then having to pay again for an old, smoking diesel car. The second mistake made by German policymakers was even more fatal. They mistook geopolitics for economics. When you phase out nuclear and coal power simultaneously, you need a transition fuel. Natural gas seemed like the perfect choice. It is 50% cleaner than coal, can be started and stopped quickly, and is very suitable for balancing the intermittency of renewable energy. The problem is, Germany has almost no natural gas of its own. So they turned to Vladimir Putin. Germany's policy of change through trade was based on a naive assumption. If Russia sold large amounts of natural gas to Germany, and if the two economies were deeply integrated, then military conflict would become unlikely. After all, who would attack their biggest customer? This logic sounded reasonable, but its implementation was catastrophic. By 2021, 55% of Germany's natural gas imports came from Russia. Germany's chemical giant, BASF, pharmaceutical giant, Bayer, and steel giant, ThyssenKrupp, all had business models built on the foundation of cheap Russian natural gas. The natural gas consumed by BASF's factory in Ludwigshafen alone was equivalent to the consumption of the entire country of Switzerland. When President Donald Trump warned at the UN General Assembly in 2018 that Germany would become totally dependent on Russian energy, the German delegation sneered from the audience. They felt this American didn't understand the advanced art of European diplomacy. On February 24, 2022, when Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, the laughter came to an abrupt halt. Looking back now, what the Germans actually did was bet their energy security on the goodwill of a dictator. This is like handing your house keys to that unstable teenage neighbor and hoping he never goes bad. When Russia cut off the gas supply, the price of German natural gas futures skyrocketed by 1,000%. This wasn't just a numerical change, it was a crisis of survival. Take BASF as an example. This world's largest chemical company suddenly found its energy costs exploding from tens of millions of euros a month to hundreds of millions of euros. The cost to produce a ton of ammonia jumped from 200 euros to 2,000 euros. You cannot pass such costs on to customers because they can simply buy the same product from China or the United States. The result was predictable. In 2023, BASF announced it would cut 2,600 jobs in Germany and shift $10 billion of investment to Zhanjiang, China. Miele moved its production lines to Poland. Volkswagen began building battery factories in Canada and the United States, chasing subsidies from the Inflation Reduction Act. This is not a temporary adjustment. It is a structural industrial shift. According to the latest data, the output of Germany's energy-intensive industries is 17% lower than pre-2022 levels, and this trend is accelerating. The competitiveness of the Made in Germany brand, which Germany was once so proud of, came largely from cheap Russian energy. When this invisible subsidy disappeared, the cracks began to turn into canyons. Ironically, German companies now find China to be a more attractive investment destination, not only because energy is cheap there, but also because the Chinese government doesn't moralize about using energy. By 2023, The German government realized that decarbonizing the electricity sector alone was not enough. They needed to decarbonize your basement as well. Green Party Economy Minister Habeck introduced a new heating law, banning the installation of new oil and gas boilers starting in 2024 and requiring a switch to heat pumps. From a technical perspective, this is reasonable. Heat pumps are excellent technology and extremely efficient. But most German houses were built between the 1960s and 1980s, with thick walls but poor insulation. To make a heat pump work efficiently in such a house, you need to redo the wall insulation, replace the entire heating system, and possibly rewire the house. The total cost can easily reach 40,000 to 60,000 euros. The policy itself is not the problem. The problem lies in the way it was implemented. The government tried to force a transition through regulation rather than guiding it through incentives. For retired seniors living in their own homes, this felt like being forced to take on huge debt for a technology they couldn't afford. The headline in Bild was "Heating Hammer," and Habeck's approval ratings fell off a cliff. The far-right party Alternative for Germany, AfD, surged in the polls simply by promising, "We won't touch your boiler." The greatest irony is that panicked Germans began buying up gas boilers to install them before the ban took effect, effectively locking in fossil fuel use for the next 20 years. It's like your doctor advising you to quit smoking, and as a result, you hoard 10 years' worth of cigarettes. Now, the German government will tell you that they met their 2023 climate goals. Germany's CO2 emissions did indeed drop to their lowest level in 70 years. But the truth behind this success is not so glorious. About 30% of the emissions reduction came from a decline in industrial output. When you close steel mills, chemical plants, and manufacturing companies, emissions naturally go down. It is like losing weight by amputating a limb. Yes, the number on the scale goes down, but you are also bleeding. Even more worrying is that because Germany shut down its nuclear power plants, the carbon intensity of its power system is actually higher than that of its neighbor France. France gets 70% of its electricity from nuclear power, with a carbon intensity of about 50 to 70 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Germany, even on a good day, hovers around 300 to 400 grams per kilowatt hour. This means that when Germans buy electric cars to save the planet, they are actually using electricity that is 6 to 8 times dirtier than the French. Europe's green energy leader has, in a way, become the biggest electricity polluter. It's like a person who quits drinking but starts taking drugs, and then claims to be living a healthier life. In May 2025, Friedrich Merz became the Chancellor of Germany, marking a major turning point in energy policy. This conservative politician faced a brutal reality. Germany was the only major G7 country whose economy contracted in 2023. Just 3 days ago, on January 15, 2026, Merz publicly admitted at a business conference that phasing out nuclear energy was a serious strategic mistake. He said, "We are now undergoing the world's most expensive energy transition. I don't know of any other country that has made its own situation so difficult and expensive." This belated admission cannot change reality. Germany's nuclear power plants have been completely defueled, and parts of the facilities have already been dismantled. Restarting them would take tens of billions of euros and years of time, and might never get public support. As a remedial measure, the Merz government is implementing a series of emergency policies. In 2026, the government will provide 6.5 billion euros in subsidies to lower grid fees, which could save households an average of 16% on their electricity bills. For manufacturing, the government has promised to lower electricity prices to 5 cents per kilowatt hour, although this will cost taxpayers 3.1 billion euros. But these are painkillers, not a cure. Germany must now permanently subsidize energy prices from the federal budget, as Merz admitted. We cannot do this for long. It is like a person with a broken leg who has to rely on painkillers to keep going instead of treating the fracture. Germany's energy experiment has attracted the world's attention, but the reaction was not what Merkel had originally hoped for. Developing countries were not moved by Germany's green ambitions. Instead, they drew the opposite lesson from it. India is building new coal plants. Vietnam has chosen nuclear plus natural gas, and China is developing renewables while also building the world's largest nuclear power projects. Their message is clear: we will not repeat Germany's mistake. Even among developed nations, Germany has become a cautionary tale. France is sticking to its nuclear-dominant energy model and plans to build another 6 to 8 new reactors. The United States, under the Trump administration, is pushing for a nuclear renaissance. Even the UK is reconsidering the role of nuclear energy. Germany wanted to be a model for the world, and it succeeded. It became the perfect example of what not to do. This influence even extends beyond the energy sector. When other countries see Germany losing industrial competitiveness due to energy policies, their enthusiasm for rapid green transition begins to cool. While researching this topic, I discovered a detail that is rarely mentioned. Germany's energy transition actually helped China become a clean technology superpower. When Germany's massive subsidies for solar panels and wind turbines created the world's largest renewable energy market, Chinese companies rapidly scaled up and eventually dominated these industries. Today, China controls 80% of global solar panel production and 60% of wind turbine manufacturing. In other words, German taxpayers' money not only failed to build a German green industry, but instead subsidized China's industrialization. This is like paying someone to renovate your house, only for them to learn all the skills and then move to your competitor's place to open a shop. Let's go back to the retired teacher in the kitchen at the beginning. The €348 electricity bill in her hand is not just a piece of paper. It is the concrete cost of a social choice. Germany chose an unprecedented path to simultaneously phase out nuclear energy, fossil fuels, and import dependency, all while maintaining industrial competitiveness and social stability. This choice was based on 3 assumptions, and we now know that at least 2 of them were wrong. First, they assumed renewable energy technology would mature fast enough to fully replace baseload power. Wind and solar have indeed made huge progress, but the development of energy storage and grid technology has not kept up. Second, they assumed economic interdependence would lower geopolitical risks. The Russia-Ukraine conflict shattered this illusion. The third assumption, that the public would support the short-term costs of this transition, is now also in jeopardy. When electricity bills soar, factories close, and job opportunities vanish, abstract climate goals begin to give way to concrete economic concerns. But perhaps the biggest paradox is this: Germany spent hundreds of billions of euros to save the planet, only to potentially make the situation worse. When Germany's high-polluting industries move to countries with looser regulations, global emissions may actually increase. This is called carbon leakage, and it's like throwing your trash into your neighbor's yard to keep your own room clean. Germany's energy experiment is not yet over, and its final outcome remains uncertain. But we can already draw some precious lessons from it. The timing of energy transition is crucial. Too rapid a change causes economic destruction and social resistance, while too slow a change misses the climate window. Germany chose the former and is now suffering the consequences. Technological reality is more stubborn than political ideals. You cannot expect a technology to be deployed on a massive scale immediately just because it is feasible in principle. It takes time to go from the laboratory to industrialization, and the political clock often ticks faster than the technology clock. Geopolitical risks cannot be eliminated by economic logic. Interdependence can promote peace, but it can also become a weapon of war. Energy security requires diversification, not just efficiency. Perhaps most importantly, public support is the foundation for the success of any long-term policy. When the costs of a policy are concentrated on a few, while the benefits are dispersed across the entire society, political backlash is inevitable. Now, Germany stands at a crossroads. It can continue on its current path, enduring higher costs and more industrial loss. It can also make strategic adjustments, admit its mistakes, and find a new balance point. Or, it can become a historical lesson about the price of idealism. In any case, the world is watching. Germany's choices will influence how the globe addresses climate change. The success or failure of this experiment will determine whether other countries choose radical transformation or a more cautious, gradual path. That retired teacher holding the electricity bill? Her choice might seem insignificant, but when millions of such choices come together, they become a force that changes history. Germany spent 500 billion euros to learn these lessons. Hope the rest of the world can learn them more cheaply. After all, when it comes to energy policy, the world cannot afford too many expensive experiments like this one. What do you think of Germany's energy transition experiment? What lessons do you think other countries should learn from it? In your country, how high a price are you willing to pay for climate goals? Share your views in the comments section. If this deep dive gave you some value, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.